like where we are now and where we have been over the years. And funny enough, like simple things like ERC-20 have had such a great impact, right? It's like the EICO wave, the DeFi wave, like literally everything came out of one single standard. So I'm very interested in seeing what happens if I bring in a lot more complex, a lot more versatile, and a lot more core piece as a standard into existence. And now I have people building around that.
Hey everybody, Tanner here with WAGMI Ventures. On today's episode, we have Fabian Vogelsteller, founder and chief architect of Luxo, plus the creator of the Mist browser and the Ethereum wallet, and author of ERC-20 and ERC-725. For anyone who's new, this is the WAGMI Ventures podcast, where we do snapshots with interesting founders from across Web3. Check out wagmiventures.io to learn more about the syndicate behind the podcast. But for now, let's get into it with Fabian from Luxo. All right, hey everybody, I'm here today with Fabian Vogelsteller, founder and chief architect at Luxo. Fabian, how are you doing today?
I'm doing busy, good.
Definitely. Well, I'm really excited about this chat together, and I think I'd like to split it in three parts, if that's cool. Where I think the first part, just introducing the listeners to some of the great work you've done in the past, and then maybe the second part, just kind of current chapter, what you're up to with Luxo. And then third, I'd love to just chat about kind of state of the space for a bit too. So if that works for you, just to start here, can you tell us a little bit about your journey into crypto and how you got involved to begin with?
Sure. So my journey into crypto started in 2013. This was like literally there was only Bitcoin. Bitcoin had this hype in March 2013, and it got my attention because I found some internet website talking about a Canadian wants to sell a house on Bitcoin, and I thought, like, that's crazy. Somebody wants to sell a house in something that I have never heard. Who would want to sell his house in that? And that kind of was my into blockchain or Bitcoin at the time. And there was shortly before the first altcoins, the first Litecoin came, and then all the other altcoins. And so I kind of followed this as a hobby alongside my work. I was totally like caught in, fascinated by this new technology. It took me like a year to fully grasp like the concepts. And in this year I had like every month this kind of revelation that I thought, now that I understood it. And I always had this revelation again and again, because it was, even for me as a coder and so on, it was quite like, conceptually very different, right? Because here you have a system where there's no one in charge, where there's no server, there's no admin, there's no control center. That took quite a while. And especially in 2013, it was not as easy to grasp as it is today with all the knowledge and all the widespread talk about this. So this was kind of my like hobby and I worked as a web developer at the time, and heard about Ethereum obviously when Vitalik like published the white paper. There was this idea of making a blockchain more than just token transfers and number transfers. I mean, at the time it was called literally just Bitcoin or colored coins for that matter. Yeah. And I mean, it was interesting for me to think about, okay, what could you do more with blockchain than just like transferring numbers around? And Vitalik had this idea of making this whole thing programmable. So I kind of followed this alongside. And then I heard in 2014 that they came to Berlin and they wanted to open an office here. And it was literally one day I met them at a co-working space opening, and literally one day before they started the pre-sale. And things happened very quickly. Ethereum collected 31,000 Bitcoin, was the biggest crowdfund ever in pure Bitcoin. Here was, Ethereum was kind of like their massively organized group of people. And they were in Berlin, funny enough, where I lived. So that was quite a fortunate event. And a few months later, I passed by their office and said I would really like to work here. And I had this feeling that they were building the network, but they weren't really thinking about the developers and the users and how to make this, understandable and adoptable. So I wrote a book about Meteor.js, building single page applications with Meteor. So I kind of like knew how to build full stack JavaScript applications that don't need necessarily a server. And I thought this was a great, fit, because I could build some applications that just run in your browser using the blockchain in the background, Ethereum, and I guess this matched with Alex, who was hired to be the UX designer of Ethereum, and he wanted to build the Mist browser, this Web3 browser, and he had this whole concept and everything, but he didn't know how to build it himself. And when I came along and my name went around in the Skype group, he realized, okay, that could be exactly the person helping me building this. And so that's what we did. So I built with Alex together the first Web3 browser called the Mist browser back in 2015. I built the Ethereum wallet with him, built a lot of things. And because I had this connection with building the first developer tools or the first apps, we had to figure out everything you need to have as a developer to work on Ethereum. So we needed to figure out how does a D-app or how does an app talks to the blockchain? How is this protocol working? How is the JavaScript library working that you use? How do you funnel any information across, the browser to the app and all of this stuff? So we had to figure a lot of things out along the way. And we were a pretty small group of people working on these things. So kind of what we did back then in 2015 is that we defined pretty much exactly how the Ethereum space is working today, which is pretty much the whole blockchain space, because almost everything is either EVM or EVM compatible and more or less uses the same tools that we built back in the day. Web3.js, for example, is one of these tools. That's the JavaScript library that most DApps use. Not sure what's the market share today, but it's probably still some 60% or so. This is, tools that people use to build the apps. So they have the easier way, let's say. So my journey at Ethereum was building the front end user experience, figuring that out together with Alex and others, building the developer tools, the standardizing things, for example, like the Ethereum provider. That's how your MetaMask talks to DApps, and many other things. One I'm more known for is ERC-20, which is this token standard, which, to be frank, is initially Vitalik's idea. He came up with the initial structure of this. We had the discussion as a small group in the wiki pages, and I just thought, okay, let's make this a proper conversation. Let's get the community involved. I thought, okay, let's call it after the RFC process, which is a request for comment process in the web for web standards. So I thought, let's call it Ethereum request for comment. And that's what I then just put there, ERC. And I created an issue, which was issue number 20. So that's the idea, was that we have a conversation with the community, and at some point we come up with a standard and make it an official whatever name, standard, blah blah. Turned out that the ERC-20 became literally the standard itself and the thing itself. So my format became the blueprint of smart contract standards, so to say. Same as the names, same as the numbers, and all of this stuff. And that's kind of the very short version in history in Ethereum.
No, it's fascinating. Very few people I think can say they've contributed that much to the Ethereum community, crypto community at large. So it's super interesting to hear kind of what that journey looked like. I am curious, since you left off on the ERC-20 token standard conversation, can you give us a little more context for those earliest discussions and kind of work around why the creation of ERC-20 would have been valuable or useful, just given, as you mentioned, what it turned into and the impact it ended up having? What did those conversations sound like? Did you even foresee kind of that it would become this blueprint that, obviously played a huge role in the ICO boom 2017 and even subsequently?
So I would say that, when we started out in building, the first Ethereum wallet and the first DApp browser, we knew that you could build anything on Ethereum. The sky is the limit, really, what could be built. Obviously, it's more like a, let's call it a Game Boy in terms of computing power. but still you could do a lot of things, like what you could build as logic and smart contracts and so on. Obviously the most low-hanging fruit was a token, because this came from the whole idea of like master coin and colored coins. So making a arbitrary token that does whatever, on Ethereum was kind of like a clear thing. Vitalik created this wiki page called Smart Contract ABIs, and he said, okay, here's a token, that's a registry. He just came up with 3 very bare-bone basic standard ideas. And I realized this is not the right place to discuss this. We need to put this into a proper format, give it a proper specification so that we can have a proper conversation and really agree on something that makes sense. And then I created this issue number 20, which was purely just chance, and wrote that proper specification, calling it Ethereum request for comment, to get kind of feedback from the community. We had then 60 people talking on this GitHub issue. You can still look it up if you go for Ethereum GitHub issue 20 or whatever, you probably find that. And you had 60 people talking, some 300 comments, and not much changed really, like from the initial draft, but we had some, talk back and forth. And I mean, if we now look back, what's the most problematic thing that ERC-20 introduced? And it's in fact the approve and transfer from flow. So the fact that you have to go to a DEX, approve that DEX to a certain amount of your tokens, or all of your amount of your tokens, and then go back and say, here, swap me something. And that's an extremely like annoying and dangerous flow, because that's how a lot of scams happen. You just go to a website, they say, hey, can I request your access to your tokens? And people think, oh, you're just requesting, no big deal. And then they literally give total access to their tokens, and that malicious contract can just pull in all the money. These are things, that we kind of saw that this could happen, but there was also, at the time, it was too early to think about ways to inform the smart contract. It was very early, right? We needed to figure out how the space works, what people will build, and all of these things. But the funny thing is, with ERC-20, this is just such a bare-bone feature and bare-bone thing you can do on Ethereum, like blockchains. And we haven't really gone beyond that much, because if you think about it, everything in the blockchain space is either tokens, and DeFi is kind of an extension of that, or now it's NFTs, which is kind of also an extension of tokens. So everything's just tokens, which is totally like 0.1% of the spectrum of possibilities. So we haven't even started exploring what blockchain could be really used for. And I think one reason for that is, first, obviously the trading, and money has some attraction to people. But the other thing is that it's very hard to use blockchain. So you don't get normal users in that would have more different interests. And there is no real proper way to identify parties on chain. So that's why even things like NFTs and this whole NFT kind of craze that we saw is purely based on the marketplaces like OpenSea or others. If you just take them away on the blockchain, there's nothing really visible. You have a bunch of NFTs and you have a bunch of random addresses that issue them or trade them. There is no transparency about who is this community, who are these people, who are these creators, right? You can't really see that, because on-chain it's just random accounts. So I guess what has been holding off the whole space is the missing profile/identity piece, the on-chain identity piece. And this is literally what I have been spending my last few years thinking and working on. Exactly what we come now with Luxo too.
Totally. So let's make that transition, because I think it's a perfect time. So, what is Luxo, and maybe introduce people a bit more to what you're trying to accomplish there.
So Luxo basically started out as this idea of, hey, let's create a network like Ethereum, obviously, ideally. I'm a big Ethereum fan. I have worked with the foundation for years. So let's create something with Ethereum, like Ethereum, but make it more accessible to people. Make it more attractive to normal users, and bring in an audience that's not so much focused around trading and money making and all of this stuff, but like normal people that are more like into social media or creating things and so on. So we came about this to the idea to make a blockchain for the new creative economies. So that's how we frame it. The new creative economies is pretty much a broad term, right? It can include obviously the whole creator economy and things, but it can also literally be anything, right? YouTube, podcasts, content creation of any sorts, journalism, social media content creation, all of this is the creative economies. But it's also a very social and a very human thing, right? It's not so much about just token prices up and down and blah, blah, blah. So the idea was pretty bold, right? It was about creating a whole new ecosystem from scratch, attracting people to build in this direction. So that's a pretty bold endeavor, and that totally has been the case so far. It's kind of like, the thing is, because I was in Ethereum and I kind of saw how we created literally a network that got to this attraction that is today from nothing. I kind of could see what are the things that make that work. Like, what are the behavior and what are the reasons why a network gets successful. I also then saw the bad examples where a lot of copycats came after Ethereum trying to do the same in some kind of artificial way, creating artificial, like Vitaliks even. I've seen that too. Creating like just trying to copycat whatever Ethereum did, and they couldn't. And the reason is because they didn't have anything of real value. They didn't have anything that really made a huge difference or made a lot of sense. A lot of them were just like, here, we are the faster chain, we are the better chain, we are now the chain for DeFi and whatever is the current trend. But they didn't have a lot of, let's say, innovation on a level that people really care. So if your consensus algorithm of your chain is like faster, that's great. But most of the time you're trading off decentralization, right? If you're faster, then you're probably more centralized. So that's a trilemma that already Vitalik and others figured out years ago, and it was kind of obvious, right? You don't have the silver bullet where you now have a super fast chain and you're hyper decentralized. It hasn't worked out so far, so that's why Ethereum is still the number one in all the metrics. But they also haven't been doing a lot of innovation on a standards level or on a cultural level, right? They just come and hop off whatever trend there is. I think where we took a different approach is that we literally created a trend. We wrote a paper called The Blueprint for the New Creative Economies in 2019, speccing out all of this, what we just have seen the last few years. We kind of like pushed a lot the digital fashion angle, worked with the early digital fashion brands, the Fabricant, Artifact, and all of these people, literally inspired them doing what they're doing today, and have been really on the works on all of this kind of creative angle. The big difference of what we are bringing or what we're doing now is, first off, we're starting the actual Luxo blockchain very soon. So that's years in the making of making this happen. But the Luxo blockchain itself is not necessarily like, it's not something new. It's literally just Ethereum. So we are using ETH2 type network. That means it has the exact same consensus like Ethereum 2, and it's on all metrics literally the same. What is different and what has been all of this time and all of this work is that I have been rethinking the core building blocks and the core pieces that people need to operate on a network and to have the core pieces that they need to even do something useful and more creative and more user-friendly on a blockchain. And that kind of piece is what these core standards, we call them Luxo standard proposals, bring to the table. And the one most important one, I would say, is the universal profiles, which is kind of like the non-tech version, the non-tech name of that. And universal profiles is kind of like think of it, your account abstraction, what people talk on Ethereum on steroids, just the whole thing figured out to all the corners that you could like figure it out to. If I can explain that, like if this makes sense in some way. So the thing is, people realize now that, okay, we can't just use wallets, right? Wallets are terrible because wallets are just private keys and public keys. That means one single password and one address. You can't change the password. It's just one address. Bad user experience, scary behavior. You do something wrong, everything gone, right? You can't upgrade it. You cannot build a reputation on top of a wallet, address, right? I mean, do you want to like live with the 5 years with the same private key, dying every day that you could lose at any moment, and
Sure.
sweating in your dreams?
Right.
That just never
Right.
happens after you got your 10 million followers on your key. That would be a
Yeah.
very, very bad future. There would be some dystopian fear.
Right.
This is what the count abstraction solves. But the thing is, what people think in account abstraction right now on Ethereum 4337 and other standards, it's basically the idea, okay, how can we make gasless transactions? That's one piece of the puzzle. Funny enough, my journey on this started in 2017 when I created a standard called ERC-725, which is 4 standards after the NFT standard, right? 721. So it's from back in the day. And back in the day, I created this standard. Really, I was part of a workshop. I had to ideate about blockchain identity, and out came this idea. And I really just thought, okay, I need to put this into a standard. So I proposed ERC-725, or I called it also a blockchain-based account system. That was way before account abstraction. So I basically created this idea of like a full-on blockchain-based account with key management and information you can attach to it and all of this stuff. This obviously then evolved over the next few years a lot. And when I started Luxo with Marjorie, I realized that this standard that initially I thought I will never have to deal with, I just like put it out there and somebody will go figure. This standard is now super important for what I'm trying to do here. So I literally had to go back and finish it myself.
Interesting.
That was not exactly what I wanted to do, but I realized, okay, nobody else is taking it on. There was a lot of hype around it back in the day. There was even an alliance. You can look up ERC-725alliance.org. That's like a website somebody created back in the day. So there was quite some hype about it, but nobody really took the lead until I came back, and I had to take the lead because I realized, okay, this is exactly what I need for Luxo. So what I have been doing, like with my team over the last like 2.5 years, is like literally build this out, like build all these standards, and it's over 20 now, which is the core account, it's key managers, it's new forms of token standards, the way they interact with each other, the way how you can extend this stuff. It's a lot of things. They will literally take years for people to unpack all the cool stuff they can now do with these Lego blocks, let's say we build. But we also build a browser extension, and we're also building a mobile app that allow people to interact through these accounts. For a developer, it's pretty much the same experience. Nothing changes for him, except that your user now has a proper smart contract-based account that he can have a profile picture on. He can attach whatever protocol somebody invents on. It can be managed properly because keys are now replaceable. They're not something that you really need to worry about anymore. So no dying, sweating nights. You can have social recovery. You could build whatever you want now on top of these systems because it's a very bare bone, but flexible, but well-defined enough core smart contract framework. So what Luxo brings to the table, compared to other blockchains in that sense, is not only a very hyped community, and it has been a pretty strong following since 2 years now, and literally like almost cult-like, honestly. But like a network that's obviously as good as Ethereum because it is Ethereum, but a whole set of building blocks that are thought out from the beginning to work cohesively in the right way. And that is what not of any of the blockchains have been doing so far. They all just copycatted Ethereum, and back in Ethereum, we just all stumbled into this. Nobody had a lot of time to think this through, back in the day, obviously.
Yeah. No, I love all of this. This is fascinating. So I think one question I might have would be, I was reading some of the content your team's produced, and there was a line about how the wide range of applicability of Luxo is guided by 3 key principles, one of which you've talked about a lot right in this conversation. The first one being identification, second, virtualization, and third, tokenization. Yeah. I think my question would be, maybe could you talk a little bit about how these principles come together to enable the new applications you're excited to make possible?
I mean, the thing is, there's one is what you do with stuff, and the other thing is what is the under the hood basics. So the under the basics is a very flexible account system that can operate on the blockchain like a wallet key that you know right now. It's just you can do a lot more things: gasless transactions, proper key management, permissions, attaching information, profile picture, whatnot, whatever people want to do. The other thing is that we redid the token standards. So I literally made ERC-20 right. I also made ERC-71 right. I basically created the two token standards in there called LSP7 and LSP8 that are like cleaned up in the way of how they're written. They're all functionally the same. They're pretty much the same. The difference is with one you transfer an amount, with the other you transfer an ID. The way you can, the IDs are way more flexible. The information you can add to the token contract is more flexible. And most importantly, they can inform the contracts they are sent to. So that means now if you send something to a DEX, you don't make this approve and transfer from anymore. You just send it to the DEX, and the DEX will be able to react on it. It can also be only sent to an address that actually can receive it. So that means you can't even send it anymore accidentally to the wrong address or to an address that no one owns. At least for these tokens, that's the case, because they're basically built in with security by design. That also means you actually cannot by default send them to an EUA anymore. So MetaMask is a thing of the past. You can still force it if you know what you're doing, but then you should know what you're doing because you can totally make a mistake. So these token standards are better. So that means we can do things like, obviously you could create things like DeFi, which I'm not so interested in. But we can create now things that have to do with reputation, right? We can create now things that have to do with the creators itself. So you now can build even NFTs where you can verify on-chain from a smart contract if an NFT is authentic. If a profile says it created it, and if the NFT said it was created by the profile, then you have a two-way claim, and this becomes an authentic verification. So you can do a lot of things. I mean, what we see from a use case perspective, and what I would like to see is things around, social interaction, DAOs, how people interact, and reputation. We call this cultural currencies. Currencies that groups create, people create, organizations create. They have whatever means or reason, and how people use them. And then NFTs, for example, they call it soul-bound tokens. I mean, Vitalik calls it soul-bound token. I find the name pretty bad because it's literally just a non-transferable NFT. The problem why in Ethereum they don't really are hard to take off is because the soul is missing, right, of your bound tokens. Because the soul is a wallet key. That's really bad soul, because that means, like, again, the problems we talked about. But if you have a proper profile that you can truly manage from multiple devices and have plenty of recovery ways and other things, you can now have a token that you attach to this profile and it sticks there forever. Because now you have a long-lasting on-chain account that you can use for whatever, your reputation or whatever things you want to do.
Love it. Yeah.
These building blocks kind of like, what make up whatever this new future will be. And I would like to see a lot more on the social side.
Yeah, fascinating. So maybe one last kind of direct question on Luxo then, where I'm curious, maybe just like one or two sort of key surprises while building Luxo. Like, how have you and your team adapted to those surprises? Because things come up, I'm sure. One thing that was interesting from a kind of the outside was just the advisor board of interesting folks you guys have put together. I mean, I wonder if you knew going in that collection of interesting people would be so drawn to what you're building. That's kind of a little bit more superficial, but I'm just curious, kind of across the board, any surprises that stand out and how you guys adapted?
I mean, the thing is, let's say we have the right contacts, and Marjorie has done an incredible job of like becoming very well known in that fashion space and other spaces that have to do with more celebrities and so on. And obviously, the big brands, they all love her. As well. We have also been the first blockchains project that initially we targeted very specifically more to fashion in order to kind of like be more directed towards a certain niche. I mean, on the end, it's a generic platform. People can build whatever they want. But this targeted fashion is, on the one hand, a nice public stealth mode because nobody bothers when you're calling it blockchain for fashion. At least not of the current players. But second, you also attract now all the female audiences. And I think one thing that has been a problem for the blockchain space is that it literally has been quite exclusive on, the other 50% of the planet, because it has been either too technical or just focused on trading and money. And it is more like, commonly like interesting for nerds and investors, but not necessarily for the rest of the world that, is maybe more on the social side. And we have been getting a lot of attention, from women all over the world in terms of like, we are probably the blockchain that women totally have heard about for sure. So we have a complete different and also in this whole fashion world and all of these this space that just has been tapping into the blockchain space a few years ago, and we were the one, like telling them about all the things they can do. So we got lots of attraction and lot of attention in this space. And I guess when it comes to surprises, I guess number one surprise, it always takes longer than you think. I guess that's a very common builder problem. That's already clear when you're a developer, right? You think, this takes like 2 months and then it's like 6 months. But when you do a project of that complexity and size, it's a lot longer. Also, the first year was more like, fundraising, reversible ICO, getting legal approval, because we did it the German way. Means we asked for permission first and then we act. That's also very slow. Building up the right team, takes time. It's obviously very hard to find the right people, that are equally dedicated, equally understanding where this is going and all of these things. So there's always iterations, within the team. Now we are at a really good place. We have a really great team. It's also the chain itself, right? We could have launched a network way earlier, but that would also have meant that we have to launch it more centralized. We probably would have launched as a POA system, proof of authority chain, because there was no really good proof of stake algorithm that was pretty much different than proof of authority. They were pretty much the same, more or less. And Ethereum was not ready at the time, so ETH2 at least, and I didn't want to launch a proof of work blockchain. That didn't make any sense. So we kind of like played around with building early versions of proof of authority into Go Ethereum, and then later actually worked on the Ethereum consensus ourselves, so building in the consensus algorithm into the Ethereum chain, building this connection between the beacon chain and the execution chain ourselves. We got pretty far with that, but Ethereum literally finished it at the same time and finished it better than us, obviously, because there were a lot more people. So we just overtook everything they had done. And then the last year really just focused on getting the ETH2 network running and ready. And there was also a lot of iterations within Ethereum itself. So there's changes in clients, there's changes in tools. So it's a lot of things going on just on that network front. That has been resolved now. So the whole network thing took a lot longer than I expected. But I think for the better, because thinking of launching Luxo at the NFT craze hype, when the gravity goes down, it doesn't matter how great you are, it goes down. And if you launch at the peak, there's only one way, it's down. So I'd rather launch on the bottom where there's only one way, which is up.
Yeah, I love it.
Pretty much what we do.
Yeah, that makes some sense. Okay, so let's take a step back really quick and just have a quick chat about kind of state of the crypto space. So putting aside token price movements for the moment, how do you evaluate the technological progress and adoption within the space? Are things advancing how you think they should be? Are we behind in any key areas? I think you've already kind of shared some thoughts on this, but I'm curious, kind of put more directly the question, is there anything you haven't mentioned that might be interesting to talk about?
I guess if you look at the blockchain space, since where we are now and where we have been over the years, and funny enough, simple things like ERC-20 have had such a great impact, right? It's like the ICO wave, the DeFi wave, literally everything came out of one single standard. So I'm very interested in seeing what happens if I bring in a lot more complex, a lot more versatile, and a lot more core piece as a standard into existence. And now I have people building around that. And that's universal profiles. This is this core account system. The explosion must be 1,000 times crazier than what we have seen so far. So that's kind of interesting to me to see what's coming now. At the same time, if you look at the space, there has been a lot of experimentation around protocols and communities, and you see the directions, right? People want to create communities, they want to create DAOs, they want to create brands, they want to create all of this stuff in some kind of a group kind of way, right? But what has been missing is, number one, the actual blockchain user, the person that doesn't just trade and maybe uses Uniswap once in a while, but the person who actually uses blockchain smart contracts on a daily basis. That user is barely there, number one. And number two, because we have no users, these D apps that have great ideas have a very hard time getting adoption because there's no users there. And now number three, the UX is just horrible, and that's the reason why there's no user. And we are still literally operating almost like we're having cars and we have to crank them up on the front all the time, just because we want to like drive. So where's the car where I just sit and make click and go? And this abstraction, this account abstraction that we have been building called Universal Profile is kind of allowing you to do these things, because now you have enough ways to abstract whatever you want to make it in whatever awesome way you want. And you don't have these restrictions anymore on the core level, which is, hey, keys is all there is, and keys is your account. So that's a paradigm shift that has to happen. And I think Luxo will be the leader in pushing that. And I think when we have this resolved, I mean, looking at the space so far, this is the only thing that has been holding everything back. I mean, everything else has been going great, but the adoption on the user front and the adoption and the change of UX has not been there. And I mean, we're literally doing the same way like we did in 2015. So MetaMask was let's say a answer to the Mist browser, because the Mist browser, you needed a full node because we wanted to create total decentralization. The Mist browser was kind of the semi-centralized version where you just had the browser extension and the node was running in the cloud. But MetaMask hasn't changed really since all of these years. And it's pretty much 7 years. That's crazy if you think about it. And that's still the user experience today. It's not very different from 7 years ago when we made this shit up. So that's kind of crazy, right? So time to fix this.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Okay, so maybe 2 last questions here. First question, what would your most generalizable advice be for founders building in the Web3 space? If you were kind of talking to yourself as a relatively new developer in the space, or, kind of playing elder statesman here, like what would your advice be?
Yeah, don't even start. No, the advice is obviously it's way harder to build a company, a team, let alone a whole ecosystem. That's very hard. It takes time if you want to do it in the right way. The second big advice, and this is an advice I gave to people already like years ago, is just don't make a token. If there's not a real use case and there's a real purpose for your token, just don't. Or make a token and clearly state it doesn't have a use case. That's a different thing, right? You can do that. You can say, that's here the Fabian token and makes no sense, but maybe I come up with a great idea later. That's a different thing. But making up like some weird whatever blah blah tokenomics that don't make any sense, bad idea, because you will get stuck justifying these token economics now for the rest of your company's life. And if you sold it, even worse so, because you need to just justify the value that people paid, and need to drag this thing along. And we've seen a few projects that have struggled with that and have changed their use case for their token plenty of times. So just don't make a token if it's not necessary. I guess this would be my 2 advices. And the third one is things take time, like a plant also. You put a seed, you don't pull the plant you don't pull it growing, right? It grows by itself. So things take time. That's also what the space has in general to learn. They need to chill a little bit. Like things don't like appear out of nowhere within 2 days.
Totally. I love that advice. So, okay, last question here. What is your team working on right now, and what's the best way for people to follow along on the journey?
So we're working very hard to get this mainnet out of the door, and it's very soon TM happening, very soon. And this is then the go and start of the Luxo blockchain. It starts with a smart contract on Ethereum. So Luxo will be born out of Ethereum, funny enough. You can become a Genesis validator if you have LUKSO. And if you know how to run a node, by the way, it will be easy with the CLI, but you still need machines 24/7 and all of this stuff. And so if you want to be a validator, you need to run machines 24/7 if you want to be a Genesis validator. And basically, if you follow Luxo _IO on Twitter, if you go to our website, you can literally see it all happening live within the next few weeks. There will be a process. We first collect Genesis validators, then we basically allow people will start the network. Luxo will be started decentralized. People will be the first Genesis validators. They run the network. They will make it happen. And then it's live, and then we migrate the LUKSO to Lux on the Luxo blockchain. And people can create profiles, and then everything is going to be moving in a new direction.
Love it. Fabian, thank you so much. This was a fascinating conversation, and seriously, huge privilege to have you on the show. So thank you for the time, and I'm excited to watch all the exciting stuff happening in the next few weeks. So have a good rest of your week here, and take care.
Thank you, Tanner.